So I want to kind of go through maybe what are some of the biblical stories in which you avoided?
Oh.
What are some of the stories of the Bible which you said, I ain't touching that. I'm not going there. Because everybody has their own canon. Which means that you go back to those same stories, those same verses, because they are a sense of comfort for you. The moment that you probably enter into the waters of Leviticus, you start to get allergic. Well, just shout out just a few of the stories in which you say, I haven't touched that, and probably don't want to touch that.
Song of Songs.
Song of Songs. How do you preach that?
Revelation.
Revelation. Most people are scared of Revelation because it's just too scary and too mysterious. Others.
Judges 19 through 20.
Judges 19 through 20.
Levite's concubine.
Oh yes. We stay away from the texts that seem to mess with us, that don't seem to go down well with us. And I want to suggest to you that those same texts are the same texts that are going to keep coming back up in your preaching ministry until you learn to deal with it.
Amen.
Because we're going to deal with the whole canon, not just our canon. And I think that's the canon in which God wants to display his redemptive process, not only in your preaching life, but also in your pastoral life. Because the ones that you don't want to touch are very much the things in which comes up in your ministry. Those are the very things that God says, here you go. It's not to throw you off. It is rather to expand your view of him. That God also not only works in the triumphant times of our life, but he also works in the cesspool, the mess, the brokenness, the unredemptive and dark places of our lives. Those are the kind of people that will show up in our ministry. And they seem to always show up at the most inopportune time.
Yep.
At the most opportune place, and also it is the place in which God is calling you to grow up. To grow up in your preaching life. We do that with our even theological doctrines that rub us the wrong way. You know, the one that rubbed me the wrong way was election. Like, man, I grew up as a Baptist. I came to college here like, what? Y'all messing with me now. You mean to tell me that I had no choice in this? I ain't with that. But then I saw the error of my ways, and my professor was like, Carl Bosma, he's sitting over there, so I can do this. But it helped me to grow. And the thing about preaching in the street is about dealing with the tension and living with it and loving it. It's not about comfortability, but living in that tension, because when we are in the city, it challenges everything we do, especially our theology. What's life in 26 right now? Marriage isn't necessary to have a family. People are more alone intentionally today. Watching media alone is normal. It's not the exception. Meanness is out and compassion is in. Selfie is the current means of getting noticed. How many selfies have you taken over this weekend? Religion isn't the main player in the culture now, but rather on the margins. So how do we accept we are now on the margins of society as opposed to being Constantinian at the center of life? How do we deal with our small c? How do we preach out on the margins of society? I want to suggest to you that we need to get ready and adopt to being odd. That to be a Christian is to be odd. It's to be like a square peg in a round hole. And rather it's connecting to something bigger than oneself is the challenge of the church now. That there is something bigger than us. Because right now, the thing that drives culture now and drives most people's lives is that their narrative is subservient to nobody's. My own story is the one that's sovereign. So that is part of kind of the context and the culture in which we find ourselves, trying to bring this ancient text to a very postmodern culture who are saying to you and I, you ain't the main thing. How do we preach in that context? How do we minister in that context? Did you know that Los Angeles is the largest Iranian city in the world? Outside Tehran, Chicago has more Poles than San Francisco has people. 1/3 of the world's Jews live in the United States. There are more Buddhists than Episcopalians in the United States. California has 239 languages spoken. In New York, 184, Washington, 181, and Texas, 169. There are more than 400,000 international students from 181 countries studying in American universities right now. But this is cool. Urban areas are forecast to grow from 1.2 billion in 1990 to 4.2 billion by 2025. Growth in some areas can exceed that of entire countries, which is why cities really matter. Mid-sized cities where the next wave of growth is coming. Grand Rapids 10 years ago was 200,000. Now Grand Rapids is 300,000 in a matter of a decade. We now have more non-Christians than Christians right now. There's a brave new world. Here is really the time that Christians need to be on. We should not look at it as something to be afraid of, but rather the brave new world in which we are called to be missional in not only our approach to cities and their surrounding areas, but also to be fearless. Not finding a place in which we can crouch down and hide away from the city, but rather to enter into it and to engage it. This is the context in which we find ourselves in. You know what the 5 most important buildings are? The hospital. We spend more money in technology for medical. What we know now, more people are going to gyms more than ever. How many times do you see stuff about if you would try this vitamin? Or even about a little blue pill? Starts with a V. Hospitals are now more important than cities right now because it has everything to do about health and wellness. Sports complexes. The biggest temple in America. Whether you are a Panthers fan or a Broncos fan, or whether you are Man U or Arsenal, or whether you are Montreal Canadiens or Vancouver Canucks. Where do people experience the most jubilation and the most religious high? Will be next week. Super Bowl 50. Why do members all of a sudden drop off? Or have Super Bowl parties in church? The university. Every now you have people under the young in their 20s, millennials, and now X and Y, who are concerned about their minds and about critical thinking and about suspicion of this modern idea. And now it has to be criticized, or I don't believe that. You need to come with something a little bit more than just that thing called belief. How do I think it through? The office building, commerce, business, this is America, that our economies are connected to one another. If China sneezes, America gets a cold. But the number one thing that drives is commerce and business and money. And then government, laws, politics, power. What building do you not see on that list?
Church. School.
Church. You know, in church history, the church is what made a city. Why do churches have steeples? Because they have steeples because people knew if that's where God is. Now churches are turned into loft apartments. Do you get a feel of the context in which we're in? Trying to preach in off the margins and to people who think you really don't matter. Why should I pay attention to you? On the margins. Here's where my theological underpinning is coming from. Here's where I'm basing where I'm coming from. A wonderful book by Harvey Kahn, the late Harvey Kahn and Manny Ortiz, called Urban Ministry. I highly recommend it. But it's simply this. Israel's missiological task was to engage in a unique way. It was to grip the centripetal force of God's glory manifested in God. But it's this, that the people on earth would flow to the holy city. You see how the city is the magnet that draws people? But even this, life in cities in the ancient Near East provided joy for the whole earth. It simply means this. We're going to find ourselves being drawn and need to see cities as the very center of where life is being engaged, and that out of that life, other life flows. This is the context in which we are now preaching in. Here's the context in which we are now entering into. And so, if that is the case, it is not for us to be dismissive or angry against cities, but rather, it is the time in which God is saying that He's going to do something new. That as God redeems the city, God redeems large stretches of His world. Because we believe Jesus is at the center, right? Somebody say amen.
Amen.
Why? Because it's love of neighbor that makes no economic distinctions or class distinctions. That's important. The church is supposed to be a place where we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, right?
Right.
Well, what is still the segregated hour of the week?
Sunday.
Why is that? Is because even in the church we make distinctions, don't we?
Yeah.
If I were to go to your church, would I be welcome? Probably.
I think so.
Well, what if I was a undocumented worker, could I take and become a member of your church? How would you preach to me? What would freedom look like for me? What would the release of the captives look like for me? How would you preach to me? It has everything to do with what does it mean to not be a stranger? What does it mean to be a part of and not excluded? Israel's formation and covenant was to create no such unbreachable barriers for the expression of righteousness and justice and compassion. There was no gulf between insider and alien, because when we do it, we're making a theological distinction. We're making a distinction. Who's in and who's not in. Do any of our churches suffer from that? We do. Because the openest purpose for the city, whatever that form, is to be God's, this is important, God's righteousness, fulfilled in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Grace, not the works of the law, is what marks our path through the city of the world. Grace. How are we preaching grace? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch. Notice that it doesn't say a successful person. Notice that it doesn't say a put together person. Notice that it doesn't say a person who has it all together. It makes a distinction and says, a wretch like me. When we operate preaching grace, everybody gets in on it, including us. Is it possible that the city can be a place of grace? Is it possible? I would suggest to you, yes it can. To seek the peace and good of the city means to spend our energy and activities praying for its peace and blessing it by doing good works. Urban refugees were to be urban public benefit. I love the word public beneficiaries. We are to go and bless the city as we bless others. And in return, we are blessed. There is a cyclicalness to it. As we are doing God's work, it comes back to us. We are blessed. We get built up. Have you ever done things and you serve people and it seems like you get more out of it than them?
Yes.
You get blessed more than they do?
Yeah.
That is exactly what God is asking us to do in our preaching and teaching. We can be public benefactors, not only in the church, but that our preaching flows outside of the church, where it touches lives with this shalom, where there is human flourishing everywhere, and that we shine light in all of the dark places of life. How many places need some light, y'all? That's where we go. That's who we are. We have to learn to exegete. In order to preach well, we have to exegete our community. He says to exegete the community means to pay big dividends for all ministers and missionaries. To exegete, which is a biblical hermeneutical word, means to lead out, to work towards understanding. No matter how adept an exegete is, it is all for naught if he or she does not also understand, say this with me, his or her contemporary audience. If you don't know who you're preaching to, you don't know their hopes and dreams. So we can't preach correctly unless we are able to exegete the community in which we're in. We all do, very often, I find out in churches, they do drive-by community work. What do I mean by drive-by?
Yes.
We just drive by. One of the ways in which you can know your community, and I insist on this in terms of, because I'm a community development guy, is that pedestrian theology is better than drive-by theology. It means that you get out and that you walk, notice, pay attention to your community. That you pay attention long enough that you master the ministry of listening. Not solving, but listening. What are the hopes and fears of the people in your community? What does the gospel they want and need to hear? Have you ever done that? When you do that, it is a pretty good chance that you will be accurate in your preaching to hit the sweet spot of where they hurt, where their brokenness is, where they need to hear the gospel, where grace needs to come down upon them and feel that sense of shalom. Richard Leisher says this: Scripture leads us to three things in sustaining the weary. To produce God's love, to hope God's will to do a new thing in the world, and what Frank Thomas so eloquently preached this morning in the chapel, to bear witness against despair. How do we bear witness against despair? People come to the city because what is magnified there is despair. The only difference is how much money they spend in order to do it. That's the only difference. In my neighborhood, they ain't got no money. But in Hudsonville, they just do it a little bit better, but it's a better looking kind of despair.
Yeah.
It's just covered up a little bit better. This is the kind of preaching, theologically, in which we need to base ourselves in. Shalom is the human being dwelling at peace in all of his relationship with God, with self, with fellows, and with nature. To dwell in shalom is to enjoy living before God, to enjoy living in one's physical surroundings, to enjoy living with one's fellows, to enjoy life with oneself. It covers the whole suite of the human condition. Because what we're after is to be pointing people towards shalom. How in your preaching are you pointing people towards shalom? Where they are in right relationship with God, right relationship with one another, right relationship with their community, right relationship with the world. That's what we're after. That's what we're seeking to do in our preaching in the terms of to the streets. Some diagnostic questions, and it's simply this. Here are some questions that can inform as you are doing your exegesis, not only of maybe your context, community, but maybe even your church or your nonprofit or wherever you are at. Here are some questions that you can ask. Where do you find the signs of God's presence in the city or in your present ministry site? Where do you see things going, wow, I see shalom in fill in the blank. I see grace here, fill in the blank. I see things going well here, fill in the blank. Where do you begin to ask those questions? Do your exegesis, if you will. Because we're very good at exegeting the Bible. But then how are we good at exegeting our own contexts? It is amazing that right now, communities change every 5 years. This is the rapid change that is happening all the time. When my community where I was at, it had been a Dutch community for over 100 years. Then in the 1980s, things began to change. It went from 64% Dutch to 67% Hispanic in a matter of a decade. And then my church found itself in a place that they did not know. And then they called it brother. Very often churches wake up too late to know what has happened to their community. Churches are now scared because they don't know what to do with the new immigrant or the new neighborhood they now find themselves in. Where do you see the presence of God? Where do you also find the signs of Satan's presence? Where is the devil showing up? Shows up in broken marriages. He shows up in poor schools. He shows up in substance abuse. In my neighborhood, he shows up in gangs. One thing you know is about people in the city, they know about Satan.
Yeah.
The first thing they ask me, what is the devil doing to me? And why in the devil is he in me? Sometimes we have to have a kind of theology that isn't afraid to deal with the devil and the world and all of their wiles. And we have to be willing to enter that. What do you see it happening? Has your church interviewed the neighborhood? This is about exegeting the neighborhood. Here's one. Do most members describe God in terms of safety or security or success?
No.
Do people describe their walk with God as something they do or in relational terms such as trust or love or joy? I'm asking a different question. I'm asking about what do people value? What do people actually value about their relationship with God? If you hear more about safety and security, then that's what they expect from God. If you hear about trust and love and joy, then you hear optimism about who God is. It is amazing to me that I heard a preacher said, those who have something to protect use safety language. Those who have lost much, they say, Lord, please help me. Please help me. Come, Lord Jesus. What do you hear? What terms do people use to describe their commitment to Jesus? How are the scriptures used in the lives of people? You get this, and what do you hear? What are people saying yes to and no to? It tells you a lot about what people really value in their lives. But it takes time to ask these kind of questions. These are diagnostic questions, which informs your preaching to people who are wrestling with hard stuff. What I find out that people in the city is that they hide it very well. You know what? I find out an awful lot at funerals.
Yes.
When you do a funeral, ain't no more line.
That's right.
But there's a lot of line at weddings.
Oh, yeah.
People begin to tell the truth when they're dealing with those hard issues. And that as a pastor, you are given access to that life. Whether they show up at a worship service, whether they show up at your door, whether they come at a children's program, how are you listening to the heartbeat, the lies and hopes and dreams of people? What are people saying yes to? What are people saying no to? The frontline of ministry is only relationships within the community and local church can fully. How do we absorb pain? How do we talk about suffering? Here's the thing. How do we become part of suffering? Come alongside of people in their suffering. How do we reinstitute lament? Is it okay to cry at your church and people won't look at you crazy? Is it okay to bring your brokenness and place that before God? Is it okay to talk about prayer requests that they like, oh, I don't know why she said that. She ain't supposed to bring that up. Don't she know we don't do that here? Somebody go talk to her. How comfortable we are with suffering and brokenness in our own midst. That will inform. So our ability to absorb pain, to proclaim hope. Why do people want to get up in the morning after they've been in church? Why should they start again on Monday saying, I am ready to take on and be hopeful even in the midst of despair? Even when my lights are about to get cut off, even when my son is dealing drugs, even when I can't change the societal structures, which I would hope that my daughter would be able to get a good education, because our school system is at the bottom of the list. How do we proclaim hope? Because that is exactly what people are looking for on the streets. Give me one good reason not to blow my brains out. Give me one good reason why I should continue to be a Christian and to live hopefully that God hasn't given up on me. That informs your worship, doesn't it? That informs your discipleship, doesn't it? That informs your Bible study. That informs your preaching. That informs everything. And this is pointing to God's authority, that God is still in control. And bring people together, spending lavishly and reflecting God's character and protecting the vulnerable. I love how John Perkins puts that. Let's look at some case studies. Well, let me do this. You all know the story of Cain and Abel, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that story.
They both bring an offering to God.
They both bring an offering to God.
Right.
So they all enter on the same level, right? Tell me more about that story.
Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain tilled the ground, and God was pleased by Abel's offering, but didn't really think too much of Cain's.
So they both had two different vocations.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with that.
No.
One brought stuff from the ground. The other one was a pretty good butcher. What else about this story? Murder.
Yeah.
Mother losing her son's loss and the loss of her son at
Hmm.
the same time.
Losing one son
Yeah.
and gaining another, or almost losing both
Both,
sons. Now let me ask you this question. Don't you think I preach? What did I just do with you?
Exegeted.
I exegeted in a way in which it brings together about the human condition. How many of us know about family relationships that are broken? How many of you are entering, how many of you know about families who keep secrets?
Oh, yeah. Every one of us.
Hello. How many of you engage in which there are things that go wrong because, hey, you liked him better than me. You accepted him more than mine. And this, God is involved. God is involved in the whole thing. He watches the whole thing. What does he do? He doesn't stop them.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Why did he let that go?
Yeah.
Because he gives us the dignity of choice. How many people, when you will engage with, who will come alongside of you, have made bad choices? And they say, if God would have just stopped me.
That's right.
Hmm? Where is the place in which Cain goes to? Goes to a city. Interesting that he goes to a city. He doesn't go to a suburb. He doesn't go to a farm. He doesn't go to a subdivision. He goes to the city. He's got the mark that nobody will kill him, but he still goes to the city. He goes to try to build a new life. How many people do you run into who are running to places to build a new life? You think that'll preach? I'm just simply asking the questions of how do we, there was population growth, competition is constant. Constant. That complicates. Who gets the favor? Some people have advantages over others. Some get lifted up, some don't. But God is sin is present. Sin is crouching at your door. Doesn't he tell Cain that?
Yeah.
God warns us. He warns him. Choice is honor. God doesn't intervene. Exile and safety in the same place. Marked and kicked out. That's just one of, as we look at texts of how we can preach to the hearts and the dreams and the hopes and the fears and address really those existential issues that are going on in people's lives. Here's another one. Genesis 11. When you look at Genesis 11, what's the main thing that you know about that story? What's the first one on there? They build a tower in order to do what?
Reach God.
To reach God. And so they don't have to deal with God. And I love that. I love that picture in that they wanted to make a name for themselves. I heard about this, but I don't know if this is true, but that sometimes people do ministry to make a name for themselves.
No.
That's not true here.
No.
How many people do you run into who want to make a name for themselves?
Yeah.
How many of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we do too? I am guilty of wanting to make a name for myself, so I don't have to deal with God. Here's the thing that we need to admit. We got the same issues that people come to our churches with. That's what we need to be honest about. The moment that we set up a us and them dichotomy, we are in trouble. We will fall to the same temptation that we are above. I love that person said this. Satan always knows how to get you. And he knows what to use. C.S. Lewis said it this way. We make a mistake when we make too little of Satan, and also when we make too much of Satan. How do we keep a balance between that? Trying to build a life without God, we believe in our own resources and resourcefulness. When our relationship with God becomes non-existent, the result is everything stops. Cooperation becomes difficult. Once God scattered and messed up their languages, what happened? They couldn't get along.
No.
They couldn't get along. Everything becomes impossible with their plans. Everything becomes impossible. What's another one? Nehemiah. Tell me about Nehemiah. Tell me about Nehemiah. He's a good dude. Nice builder.
He was burdened by the vulnerability of the city.
He was burdened by the vulnerability of his people. And then he gets to come back and do what? Come on, you Bible scholars. To rebuild the wall. Can you tell me what he did in order to rebuild the wall? What did he do first? He wept. He wept before he started building. That doesn't sound like a great plan that an architect or any developer would ever use in order to build a city. He wept. It seems unorthodox, doesn't it? But why did he weep? Why did he weep? What was that? The pain of the city. He learned, as I said, to absorb the pain. He took it within him. Who else does that? Who else absorbs pain for us? Jesus. Why is that so comforting to us?
You don't have to be the center.
We don't have to do it.
We don't have to be the better at it.
You don't have to be.
We don't have to. Amen. We are not to die for people. But we do need to absorb pain. Not avoid it. But rather to step towards it.
Yes.
To step near it. To be in close proximity to it. When we do that, something really powerful happens. Our preaching becomes more authentic. Because you're not just talking about a book, now you're talking about a person. You're talking about a face. You're talking about a life. You're talking about a relationship. You're talking about stories. You're talking about life. That's what people are dying to hear in the city. Where's a place I can go to take my pain? And we can still build a hopeful city, a hopeful life, a flourishing life, even in the midst of that. For the next 2 minutes, I'm going to look at a couple of New Testament ones. So I'm going to go really quick here. Nicodemus. What can you tell me about Nicodemus? I know I'm making you work here, but tell me about Nicodemus.
He's a Pharisee.
He was a Pharisee.
Kind of full of himself.
He was all full of stuff.
Came to Jesus by night.
Came to Jesus by night.
Yeah.
That brother came to Jesus by night.
Yeah.
Why did he come in the day? Because he didn't want all his other friends to see him. Because he's a Pharisee. He's supposed to know. That's like a seminary professor. Coming by Jesus, can I talk to you for a little bit, man? Can I hook up with you? But there was something about Jesus that attracted him. He said something else, that he was reputable. He had authority. He was somebody. What's interesting in this conversation with him, what does Jesus tell him?
Born again.
What? Don't you know I got a PhD from Hebrew University? Don't you know that I have been trained by the best rhetoricians in all of Jerusalem? Don't you know who I am? And yet Jesus tells him, you must be born again. I can imagine how that felt. And yet, he still did it.
Amen.
Yes.
He still did it. He still wanted to know, there's something missing in my life. And yet the Spirit was elementary. He had to deal with God's Spirit to transform him. He had to deal with this Jesus who still had to do something with him. Be born again. And I love that he starts off with a conversation on religious grounds. When people start stuff with religious grounds, what are they hiding? It's always a way to try to avoid dealing with really the real issue. I found out that people never tell you exactly what the issue is up front. I don't know if you ever experienced that. It takes about a few hours before, okay, now let me really tell you why I'm here. Here's why I'm here. And Jesus is doing the exact same thing with Nicodemus. He gets to the root of the problem, but that he needs to be reborn. He needs a change. What about the woman at the well in John 4? What about her? She was ostracized. What else? What else about her?
She was in need.
She was what?
In need.
She was in need. Did she have some? Did she have some problems? She has some issues going on in her life, right?
Yes.
And all she wanted to do was just show up at that well, hoping nobody that she knew would be showing up. Just let me get my water and get on with my business.
Yep.
And then this dude, who's a Jew, talking to a Samaritan, that's like Spartans talking to Wolverines. Just imagine that you are talking to your enemy, and he says, what to her? He says,
Give me a
Give
drink.
me
give me a drink. Don't you know we ain't on speaking terms?
Yeah.
We ain't supposed to be even hanging out together. That doesn't happen in churches, right? That don't happen in churches. I used to have this guy you couldn't sit in his pew.
Oh gosh.
because his butt print was on the pew, and there were some visitors who came and sat on his pew, and he was freaked out.
Yeah.
And he was freaked out so much that he went back and forth 4 times, hoping that they would move.
Oh.
And when they didn't move, he left.
Wow.
Insiders, outsiders. She had an irreparable reputation. And yet, what does Jesus do there? He says, I am
The living water.
the living water.
What you need is what I have.
I'm the living water. I may not know about your stuff, baby,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm the one who can make life well up in you.
That's right.
And notice he uses the exact thing in which is in front of him. Notice that. He does show and tell right there at the well. That's amazing. When I preach, in our preaching, there are so many things in which are right in front of you and that you can use. I think that preaching to the street is like show and tell. Think about that. Preaching is absolutely an open book test. In fact, you will learn more about people by hanging out 1 week, and that will inform your preaching on Sunday. In fact, God will tell you everything that you need to know, and watch it be confirmed that week.
Yeah.
Watch it be confirmed. You're going to meet some woman at the well, you're working on John 4, and he shows up with some person who was dealing with the exact same thing,
That's right.
and you say, Lord, how did you not know that I was dealing with this? God brings these wonderful living metaphors right before you practically every week, only if we pay attention to the lives of people. Frederick Buechner says it this way: listen to your life. Listen to it for all of what it's worth. We need to do the same thing when we preach, is to listen to people's lives. They will tell you exactly what is going on. They will tell you exactly what in our heart, soul, beats, issues, pains, right there. It informs your preaching to where people are really at. I'm going to stop there. And what I like to do is just, are there any questions? Any questions or anything for clarification? Yes?
So I live in like a small town. I go to a Christian college, and I kind of have an issue like reaching people because I'm at a Christian college, and everyone's like, "Man, I already believe whether they do or not." And so, like, what are some ways that I can just like, minister to people without getting on a box in the middle of the street? I mean, I'm up for that, but I don't think that it would come across as beneficial as maybe other ways. Maybe it will. I don't know.
Well, it goes back again. How are you listening? Even though the people say that they're at a Christian college and everybody's Christian, but again, I think that all Christians come with secrets.
Wow.
We all come to Christian places like this. We all got our hurts. We all got our pains, and we all got our struggles. And here's what we do. We spiritualize it.
Sure.
I'm just as pleased with Jesus today, and I ain't had an issue today.
I'm so glad.
Until you begin to pull back the layers through conversation and starting to build trust. All of a sudden, the veil comes down. Then they start to say, well, I'm really struggling with doubt. I don't really know if I believe what I thought I believed. It starts to inform, but it has to be done in a way in which you are building relationships, where you gain trust. Not to use them,
Yeah.
but to be kind of a listening spiritual friend to them. But that takes time. But it is there, but it takes time. And I bet if you would institute the ministry of listening, I bet you'd find out an awful lot. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, God.
I'd love to know when you were in your context in Grand Rapids, how you preached during election years.
Oh, Lord.
What
Yeah.
was guided here?
Mm-hmm. See, because my church, my church was like 60% Republican, and about 30% Democrat, and the others are like, well, they don't even care.
Yeah.
I try not to preach to a particular issue. Because because people have hot button issues,
Yeah.
whether that's abortion,
Yep.
or war and peace.
Yeah.
I try to preach in such a way to do it this way. How are you loving the person whom you disagree with? It's really reframing it in a way that you don't make it about the issue.
Yep.
Okay.
You make it about, it's not your political affiliation, it's not your hot button issue. It is about the people whom you disagree with vehemently and loving them even in spite of. What is God trying to teach you on which you need to love a Republican? Because they are your brother and sister. How does God need to change you to love someone who just happens to be Democratic and not believe or vote the same way that you do? But there are also other things in which you do with them that has nothing to do with politics. So I try to draw it back to and not get distracted from my vocation is really to preach the hell out of them. Yes.
Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the pain of the city? You know, you're supposed to absorb it. What happens when you become, you absorb too much maybe?
Mm-hmm.
What do you, and you come to a place where you probably want to run.
Yeah.
How do you deal with yourself in times like that?
Three things. Number one, you're not in control of the city. So I would suggest that, and I do this for myself, I get out of the Messiah business. There's only one Messiah, and it's not you and it's not me. We're not responsible for the entire city. Number two is that I have to find a place of rest and Sabbath. I need to create some space in my life in which I'm taking care of me. Because when you take care of yourself, you're really taking care of your people. You're taking care of your ministry. Because here's the thing, you are finite. And I think very often we need to re-engage again with our own Sabbath to realize again that we are creatures and not creators. We have our own limits. And there is power in knowing limits.
That's right.
There is power in that. Because it means to put God in his rightful place and to be in our rightful place. And the third is this, that we find spiritual friends in whom we can confide in to tell our mess to.
Yeah.
One of the things that happens in ministry is that we become lone rangers. And what happens is that when pastors and ministry leaders, they do not just burn out. They flame out.
Yeah.
And what we do is that we take other people with us.
That's right.
And it doesn't matter what that is. Because when we are caught in a picadillo, it's not just us who suffer. It's all the people who are attached to our ministries, whom we poured our lives in, who also suffer as well. So that's what we got to do. Those are three things that I offer. Yes. And you guys got to go too. So
Yeah.
I don't want to be presumptuous, but just adding on your first point, psychologists I would deal with a lot of police and military, and post-traumatic stress. And at the end of every night, I would pray, I'm you. I'm God, God, I'm you.
That's right. We have to, and I suggest this as a ritual, is that maybe every night of practicing, this is what I've done, is that before I go to bed, I hand my ministry back to God.
Right.
There's something powerful about that. When you hand it back to God, you are releasing it from your control. And you are operating in an act of faith that God will do it better than you. That maybe there's some things that He knows about it that you don't. And the other thing is that I do is that God speaks to us in our dreams. Notice how many times God in the Bible spoke through dreams to people.
That's right.
Because you know when you're dreaming, He has your undivided attention for the first time. That's when God begins to speak to you on a level, but also speaks to you at the very heart. And guess what? When you wake up, you remember it. You remember. That's what you were saying to me, Lord. Now I get it. I get it. So a simple act of just giving the ministry back to, even giving your preaching back to God, it really frees you up from trying to control, take over, and be too responsible for what He never asked you to be responsible for. That helps you to walk lightly when you're doing your exegesis of not only your own stuff, but also your community. So thank you very much. Thank you.